It's my great pleasure to welcome first Mike Underhill, Chief Executive of EECA. Mike has extensive management experience in the gas and electricity sector in New Zealand and overseas. He's been Chief Executive of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, or EECA, since May 2007, and is also the Independent Chairman of the Security and Reliability Council of the Electricity Authority, which sounds like the job from hell to me. Mike's former roles include being Chief Executive of Well Networks, TransAlta and Energy Direct. He was also Chairman of Pacific Energy Limited, EECA, and Catalyst, the Waikato Regional Development Agency. He also has a bachelor's degree in engineering, more qualifications in economics and advanced management from Harvard as well, and is a fellow of the Institute of Professional Engineers. Mike, welcome. Free mic if you prefer.
Okay, well, two things on the weekend caught my attention. We beat the Welsh, so that was one thing over there. And the Brexit means you can buy second-hand British EVs for 10% cheaper than you could on Friday. So are members of the Second-Hand Motor Vehicle Dealers Association here. Clear opportunity. So, and the third thing is I am from the government, so you can trust me. So having said that, let's start. So I was just going to do a very quick link as to why we're even having this conversation from a climate change perspective. But first, an advert. The IEA says the most effective tool for reduce energy sector emissions is actually energy efficiency. Just remember that. Moving on. So we have a carbon challenge in New Zealand, as do most other countries. Most is farming and the other part is energy. We're interested in the energy part. That's our picture. I'm going quickly to get through these ones. Which is easier, cows or cars? There's the equation. Are you equipped with corks or are you equipped with electric vehicles? So basically that's the thinking you have to do. And a great opportunity. And it's one of our best opportunities, both for energy efficiency and for fuel substitution. And it's interesting when you look on there how dominant the transport sector, how dominated it is by private vehicles, trucks, and the light commercial vehicles. That's our dominant use of transport energy. And people are talking about $9 billion of oil a year. That's correct. The transport sector, the on-road transport sector, uses, as we expect, about 80% of that. That's where it goes. You and I in our private cars. And when Martin gets up after me to talk about his private cars, he'll share his fuel efficiency secrets with what he drives to work. Private joke, but you better come clean, Martin. Otherwise, I will out you. He is a V12 XJ, whatever, Jaguar. But thank you, Martin. I walk to work. So, are we on the same page now? Thank you. All right, moving right along. So, some facts. EVs are better for the environment. And if you look at the life cycle analysis, because we heard some questions earlier on about, well, yeah, but the batteries, et cetera, et cetera. Well, pure EVs have 60% fewer CO2 emissions than petrol vehicles across their life cycle. If you're fortunate enough to have one in New Zealand, they're 80% less because we're predominantly renewable electricity going in there. And so that's an important fact to remember. These are significantly more environmentally friendly. Are they more expensive? Well, we have a tool on our website which is called the Total Cost of Ownership tool. Surprisingly, but not surprisingly to some of us, if you do a total cost of ownership over the life cycle, actually they're not more expensive. And increasingly becoming less expensive, we get hung up on the capital costs and, excuse me, generally they are more expensive. So where do I charge it? Well, the great beauty in New Zealand is, even compared to BC, we have a very short commute distance. The average commute distance in New Zealand is 32k per day. How many days do you need to worry about charging your vehicle up if that's your average commute distance? Overnight, with 230 volts, easily charge it up overnight. Don't need an expensive charger. We talked about thousands of dollars for charging systems overseas. Bit of a question about what you're going to plug into the wall, but basically it's a plug into the wall type situation in New Zealand. When we think about charging, just think about that we have that sitting in our own houses, and actually most of us can park off the road, so you don't need to drag your power cords halfway down the road. Here's the thing. It does take a little longer to put electricity in your car than it does to put petrol in your car. And it's quite interesting when you work out how many minutes per megawatt hour you're trying to put in your car. But that's why people are looking at the shopping malls, the cafes, the car park buildings as obvious places to put these chargers. So thinking about charges, what's the government's role? And quite a bit of it is what's the government role. So just on the charges, I think the government has a role to think about the electrical safety aspects of that, the consenting issues maybe associated with roadside charges. Are the people bringing in cars 1 or 2 hours that bring them into charge on 110 volts? They don't work too well if you plug them into 230 volts, so sort those things out. And is it easy, Greg Skelton, to connect a fast charger to a local lines company? Greg's speaking soon, he'll answer that one. But basically to provide information. And it's interesting when you look at this slide here, which says for fast chargers and all chargers, it looks like we've got New Zealand covered. Well, the only trouble with showing a global map like that is there's still a few Ks between each charger. And if you superimpose the 1.6 million houses with chargers automatically in their garages, you'd have a lot more dots than that. All I'm saying is quite seriously, from the remote charging points of view, there is a lot of work being done just literally in the last few years. And I congratulate the charging sector in the work they're doing there. So, some trade-offs. Well, in New Zealand, 70% of us only ever buy second-hand cars. Unless you're the chief executive of a lines company, most of us are only buying second-hand cars or chairman of the Wellington Regional Council. So we generally buy Japanese second-hand imports or second-hand fleet vehicles. So if you're thinking about a target market, it's quite interesting for new vehicles. It's quite interesting to think about that. And when you look at fleets, and good on the fleets, but they naturally take a pretty conservative view of what is an investment opportunity. There's the capital cost, a bit of running costs, but actually you get rid of the vehicles before the maintenance costs become too high. And what about the resale value? And because there isn't really a market in 3 or 4 year old second-hand EVs, then a very conservative view gets taken. So there's a real information trend to build on what's happened overseas to say, for the second-hand fleet vehicles, what is the market going to be like and what gives them the confidence to go into buying new EVs. What about the batteries? Malcolm, thank you for your great view of the future. I'm not going to say anything about batteries, but as an electrical engineer, give me all your unwanted batteries and I'll plug them into my house because I think that's... So what about the 30% of new car buyers, the private buyers that are head of lines companies, etc., that are into new cars? David Crawford, give us some choice in vehicles. And I think you're answering that question by saying there are more and more vehicles coming to New Zealand. The real challenge is the lack of choice in New Zealand. So, and are the sales staff in dealerships interested in selling you an EV versus the petrol equivalent? So coming in through some of these trade-offs, you start to see, well, probably there's a bit of a role for government, but now that I work for the government, why does everyone think the government has to do everything? Which is a fair question. So in the package the Minister announced, various government agencies have been given various challenges. So in EECA, because you trust us, ours is about providing information. So we have a program over the next 5 years of providing information. And we're drawing on other people's expertise. So Chelsea, you thought you're out here at the behalf of this. We're here to get every ounce of information from you. British Columbia and I have got a place up at Otaki. I don't know where you came from at the Kapiti Coast, but get our money's worth. And Malcolm, don't you leave the country. So the point I'm saying is we need to learn from this expertise that is around the world, the challenges you guys have got through, because I think there's a really ready market in New Zealand, provided we can get the information out there. And there are a lot of trade allies, the Drive Electrics, the Better NZ Trusts, etc., pushing this message. So we want to, Chelsea, bring some fun into this. It should be exciting to have one of these. Your maths wasn't quite right. It's about 30 cents a litre in New Zealand to pour electricity into your car. As I said, we have a low commute distance and we have very few emissions. So our aim is to encourage you to think about your next vehicle being an EV and to help overcome some of the myths and to strengthen some of the advantages. So winning the hearts and minds, Aaron, I see you sitting there, is part of the deal for the information campaign. So how do we win the hearts and minds of New Zealand to say, yep, my next vehicle I think will be an EV? And there is a vision, 64k vehicles by 2021, and then how do we go then to get mainstream? Actually, even my eyes water because the doubling each year is quite a challenge to do that. Very easy this year, but then when you get 64k in 2021, I think it's 128k in 2022, 256, etc., that's quite a few. But that's why Martin and I are both retiring from the industry, having set those challenges. But that note of cowardice aside, I mean, the potential is so great here. So the view I have is part of our information campaign is dispel the myths and reinforce the benefits and the fun factor. So some urban myths, and there's a lot of them, but just 2 or 3. EVs will use all the electricity we have in our system. Absolutely. But we have so much consented renewable electricity just waiting to come online that we can easily supply all the needs from renewable electricity that's already consented. It means burning more coal. Well, not if you're going to use renewable electricity. So we ain't like some other countries where coal is the primary source of producing electricity for this. Renewables is the primary source, and we have a target to get even more renewable for electricity. Batteries, they're a damn disgrace. They're the reason they're so expensive, Malcolm, as you quite clearly said, after 3 years, they either blow up, like in the Boeing 737s, or they electrocute you, or they just stop you on the motorway. Now, fortunately, being an electrical engineer, I sort of understand that. I actually think these batteries last for 10 years, no problem. A bit of degradation occurring. But if we're only driving 32k a day sort of thing, how with degradation? So I think there's an urban myth there to be knocked over. And as for these rare earth metals, I think Malcolm used that terrible lithium word. I have to say lithium's neither a rare earth metal, but actually these vehicles don't consume rare earth metals any more than any other vehicle. And you can go down this list of these myths, and part of the role for information I see for government is to help address these myths, and if there are some myths that are true, then obviously we need to be upfront and honest about them. We have a second role for EECA under this thing the government's launched, which is a contestable fund. I hope I'm looking at a room of people that have some serious opportunities to present to say we would like to join with the government in making a campaign to push EVs. So it's to encourage and support low emission vehicles. So actually, I'm sorry, Malcolm, you could put your hydrogen vehicle or into this. It's not a subsidy for business as usual, and up to 6 million a year, starting this year with 4 million. So we're looking for ideas. And some of the, for examples, is branding tourism routes. Tourism is a big thing in New Zealand, so can we do this? New vehicle types, bit of discussion on electric buses early, but this is an opportunity to demonstrate those, and commercial vans. One of the few advantages of living up the Kapiti Coast, every Sunday morning I hear the gentle whir of the electric rubbish truck going past my house, and if they can do it in Kapiti, well then why can't we do it in the rest of the place? And then things like car sharing schemes, etc. The real point I want to make here is this scheme will only work if people come in with us. Now, one of the things I've learned about working for government is they don't have they have some ideas, but they don't have all the wise ideas, and that's why this partnership arrangement to draw in from the wider community, not just local government, but the private sector, is so important. So if we think by the end of August, we're about ready for the first round of this. And finally, I just think we are uniquely well placed in New Zealand to grab the EV opportunity. But it needs not just government, not just local government, not just the automotive sector, not just the electricity sector, but they all need to work together, because ultimately it's all of us that are going to be customers for this, but it needs us all to work together. So 64k vehicles ain't going to happen by itself, but sitting in this room I see elements from each of the sectors that will make it happen. Thanks very much.